Hey, today I have a friend of mine, David Mansilla. He is the CEO of ISU Corp Software. He's the author of Your Business Lives Through Code. He is also the host of the Break Free podcast, which I highly recommend, and I'll have the link in the show notes for you. And I was on his show. He's an investor, mentor, philanthropist, and honestly, one of the most positive guys I know. When you're around him, he has energy abound to share, and you just have no choice but to feel it and to share it. So, David, thanks again, brother, for coming on this episode.
It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Thank you for having me, Andre.
We met through Strategic Coach, which listeners have heard a lot about, and we just started talking, and then you invited me onto your podcast, and we had a discussion about my ADHD journey. And later on, I think probably a couple months ago, we are talking and you mentioned, hey, I'm actually going for an ADHD diagnosis myself. So I thought I wanted to share. So right now, what I got is someone who just kind of started it and now is in the process of getting the diagnosis or near diagnosis. And I thought this would be a great story to share because you're a very successful entrepreneur. You originally come from South America, and I don't want where are you from originally?
Guatemala.
Guatemala. And you've had a lot of hardships and trials and tribulations, but you still made it work with undiagnosed ADHD. So again, whole purpose of this podcast is to celebrate ADHD successes. It's challenging and difficult, but it's doable. And first of all, my first question to you is, why did you decide to pursue a diagnosis?
Well, it's interesting, Andre, because I remember going for dinner with you last year, and you were asking me some questions, kind of to see whether I had a pattern of the ADHD or not. And at the end of the dinner, you told me, David, most likely you have ADHD. But as a good ADHD person, it just flew above my head, and I never thought about it again. And I had one of the most challenging years in my personal life this year. And my kids left the house finally. I was home alone for a while with my wife, but because of COVID, one of my kids came back and stayed for us with 2 years. But she left this year, and then we had these months to reanalyze our lives with my wife.
Oh, interesting.
It was hard because she was realizing how much work she had to put into the relationship and how much she was being my bumpers. And the more we talked, the more I remember our conversation. And I still didn't pay attention to the whole idea of having ADHD until I was talking with Dan Sullivan, our business coach, and I told him, I think I may have this thing. And he said, David, you have it. And he said 60% of my students have it, and 40% haven't been diagnosed. And it's very common among entrepreneurs. So that freaked me out. So I went and seek counsel. So I went to psychoanalyst, and I just by blessing, this guy is ADHD too. My psychoanalyst is ADHD. So he sent me to a psychiatrist, and sure enough, I had it. And he told me, I could have told you have it, but I'm not a doctor. So I'm going to send you to a certified doctor that can tell you, so you can actually have the diagnosis well done. So this happened a month ago. And it felt almost like there is a light that came from heaven and started shining all my behaviors. Because it is a terrible disease if you don't handle it properly. But if you handle it, it's a superpower. I feel like I just need my cape with Superman in the back.
Exactly. If we manage it, it becomes our strengths. Agreed.
But looking back, we bought an ADHD book with my wife where it explains how to be a partner of an ADHD person. And she started reading this book, and everything the book said was resonating with her. For example, she always felt like the bad person in the relationship. I was always the fun guy, the freedom guy, and she was always bringing me back. And then people look at her like the bad person, and she wasn't. She was the balance in the marriage that made it work. We've been together for 33 years, and she has to put up with my behavior all this time. And it's not fair. And it's just by miracle that we're still married. You know that 90% of ADHD couples get divorced. because they don't know that there is ADHD in the family, right?
Yeah, they think it's a behavioral or a personal thing, and it's a brain thing. It's just the way the brain is wired. And now that we understand what it is and our behaviors, on both sides of the fence, you got to work together and compromise. And it was clarity and understanding. Now I understand why you're doing that, not because you're being mean or you're being lazy. It's, oh, that's how your brain is. Like for me, my hat has to stay on the hutch in the same spot all the time, and don't move it, don't touch it, because that's where everything I need for tomorrow goes in. And if you put a piece of paper on it, I lose it. And I mean, lose it like physically, it's gone in my head, it's gone. And now there's like, okay, now I understand it's part of the routine, so I can save my mental energy from making decisions. Yeah. So just get that understanding and clarity is definitely key. And I like your summary of like how it's a light from heaven shining on your behaviors.
Yeah.
Clarity.
And now we are looking back. So I'm talking to my psychoanalyst every week, and it's been a blessing because again, he's heavily on ADHD too. So we are going through my past and looking at the traumas of my life, which are many, many traumas. But on top of that, it's also genetic, right? So genetic, so you get it from your siblings and you get it from your parents. And analyzing my dad's life, that he's already dead, but analyzing his life, we realized that he was ADHD too. So I got it through my dad, and also got it through traumas in my childhood. And with my wife, it's been a period of healing, specifically the last 15 days, brother. It's been talking, analyzing. For example, my condition comes with excessive energy. So
hyperactive. Yeah.
Hyperactive.
Very.
And hyper-focused. Hyper-focused. I focus on one thing. I'd rather die not to complete that. And that's what made me successful. That's why I'm wildly successful, because hyper energy plus hyper focus, I don't get no for an answer, right? I remember watching one of these movie stars saying that if he goes on a treadmill against another person, he'd rather die running than letting the other person win. And that's how I feel in life. I'd rather die trying than not succeeding. And that's how I do everything.
And I think a lot of ADHD entrepreneurs are like that. Right? Just get her done no matter what.
The problem is that that's a perfect formula for losing your family, for hurting your wife, for hurting your siblings, for hurting your coworkers,
and your health.
Everybody was like me, but nobody's like me. Do you know there's only 3 to 5% of the population that get it? I just read the study that said 3 to 5%. It's not a lot of people, right?
No. So why was it important for you to get the diagnosis, or for you to decide to get the diagnosis? Like you explained what made you decide it, because it was the conversations, but why was it important for you to chase it?
Breaking point in my relationship with my wife. Being with ourselves, allowing ourselves to examine why we want to stay together, because there is no more kids. And my wife realizing that something's got to change because she's had enough of me, right? And she put up with this for 33 years. It's time for her to gain her life back. Because she felt like the bad person, like the high school principal, always setting rules, and me always breaking those rules. This year, because there was no more responsibility in the house, I tend to travel a lot. Yes. And now I know that it's also my ADHD that made me do.
It's a hyperactivity to keep that motion always moving, and then keeps your brain engaged. Yes.
And my wife is not ADHD, so she didn't want to go to all these crazy trips with me. So I started traveling by myself, splitting the family apart. Until we finally had a come to Jesus moment where it's like either you change your behavior or we have to find our separate ways. And I love her with all my heart.
Yeah. And I think that's a very valid point that you just made, because it just hit me where I ended up undiagnosed times. I just went on a lot of solo trips. They were business related, so it was justification. I went alone, but I always tried to make the trips, bunch them all together. So it was a very long time. And then I didn't realize it was me just trying to keep active. And that was starting to separate things. And I think a lot of listeners can relate to this also. So I think it's a great observation that you made. And then the other thing too, is I heard is, like for me, it was a life tempest. It was 3 perfect storms colliding. That's when I got the diagnosis myself. And then you've got the similar experience where something bad was happening or potentially coming bad, and we need to get clarity. And it's unfortunate that we have to have ADHD diagnosis when things are not good.
Yeah. You know, if I only pay attention to you, I would have get diagnosed last year. I would have avoided a lot of pain this year, a lot
Yeah.
of trauma, right? But you know, I believe, you know, I'm a born again Christian, and I believe God has a plan for me. And you know, when you ask, it will be revealed to you in His time. And so I needed to go through this trauma. I needed to go through this horrible tribulation, because now I'm taking it so seriously, Andre. And now I'm doing the right things. For example, my psychoanalyst asked me, I bet you love coffee. And I'm like, if I could, I will drink 7 cups of coffee a day.
Yep.
And that's what I was doing in my 20s and my 30s. In my 40s, I got a lot of acid reflux, so I went down to 3 cups. And he says, exactly. And so he's explaining, every time you drink coffee, your dopamine goes up, and then you crash below the baseline, so you take another cup, and you keep doing this up and
Do you
down.
put sugar in your coffee?
No, I don't.
No, so it's not necessarily the dopamine. It's just the fact that it's a stimulant and gets you to be able to focus better. Yeah, which helps with the dopamine kick. Yeah.
Right.
So everything in your past is making sense now.
Yeah, no, what I'm realizing, for example, right now I am in a 2-month travel fast. So we're putting things, we're experimenting with my wife how to alter my behavior without going into depression. Because that's the problem. If I enter into a monotony, if I have a routine for too long, I go into depression.
Correct.
And right. So now, okay, how do we fight that without having to travel so much? Right. You know, traveling for me, like I even like the airport. It's crazy. I go to the lounge, I stay there for 10, 15 minutes, and then I walk all over the airport. And the walking and seeing different people and all kinds of environments, it fulfills me. It's weird.
Yeah, it's you're just satisfying your ADHD brain and keeping moving and keeping it different. And while you were doing that, you were coming up with a lot of good ideas and thinking.
Yeah.
And then having that background noise helps you distract your brain a little bit, so you're able to think on 1 or 2 things rather than 500. Right. You know, even on the plane, I find just the background noise of the plane while we're flying, I'm able to think better and more focus on the plane than I can anywhere else, because it's just that little slight distraction, and knowing I'm on the move, that we're able to do this, thinking on 1, 2, 3 things versus 500, which a lot of people don't realize. To be able to think on only 3 things is a brain break, right?
Last night, we went out for dinner with my wife. And there was a little moment where we had a bit of silence. And I could quickly pick up the conversations from 3 tables around me. And I could hear exactly what they were saying and understanding their conversation. And it freaked me out, because now I'm paying attention to my behavior.
Yeah.
And sure enough, I was telling my wife, and she said, see, this is why I feel lonely. Because you used to do these things without knowing, automatically. And then I felt like I was talking to a wall.
Yeah, then the assumption is you don't care, you're not paying attention, and I feel left out, but really it's the brain doing things that you can't control. That was a big insight from my wife too, was something along those lines. So it's good. And I got give you a lot of credit for both of you to take a serious look at this and to understand it and how it affects both of you, and reevaluate how you're going forward. Yeah. So now you've got the diagnosis. What do you see down the road now?
So we're doing an evaluation to see whether I can stay away from medicine by just doing behavioral changes in my day.
Yep. Controlling your environment.
1 or 2 months. If I pass that test, we'll try to stay away from medicine. But if I have to take it, I'll take it. It's fine. Just to take the edge off, right? Another thing that I'm doing in my business is surrounding myself with doers.
Yep.
Because I am, and I think this is also because of ADHD, I have so much creativity. I have so many visions that I want to implement. So now I have somebody here in the company that can actually take all the input from my hyperactive brain and go with 1 or 2 ideas, and just 1 or 2, and focus on what we're doing in business and getting things done. And I tell you, brother, like, it's been the best investment I've done this year. It's costing a lot of investment, a lot of money, but I know it's going to pay off, because now I have people that are complementing me, so that I don't have to, you know.
Yeah. So why are you going to do all the fall through work when, 1, you don't want to do it, and Two, your brain can't really deal with it. And to keep interested, we got to keep changing it up and dealing with unique things. So putting the right people around you to do the things you're not good at is the one way to go. And that's where I've always said that's how you control your environment. As an entrepreneurs, we have this ability to hire people to do things we don't want to, or to change your office, to change, like make your company ADHD safe is kind of like what I've done myself. Right? I'm in my own office here. There's nothing on the walls. There's no shelves. There's nothing here to distract me except for stuff I can rest that down. Everything I need to do work is outside, out of sight, so I don't get distracted. So there's a lot of unique ways we can do it. What's your biggest challenge building your ISU Corp while you were undiagnosed? What do you think was your biggest challenge?
Making my team behave the way I behave and thinking that they were all weird, which when I was the one that was weird.
That's
I had
huge.
to go through a lot of pain and almost a bankruptcy to realize that my employees were not my soldiers, that they had to do and say things the way I asked them to. I went through a big transformation in 2013 when I was introduced to prayer meditation, and that changed my behavior and changed my business too. So now I've been focused in the last 7 years on building a beautiful culture where I get people inspired to do good things. And I am always thinking what's in it for my team, not what's in it for me. And allow them to shine within their own capabilities without forcing them to do something they're not capable of doing. So that also comes in the hiring. So the biggest challenge was HR. It's funny because I used to treat my clients like gold and everything was my clients and my employees were my slaves and they needed to say or do what the client wanted.
Right.
And I had it completely backwards. Now I focus 100% on my employees. I build them, I treat them like they are royalty. And the side effect is having happy clients because if your employees are happy, your clients will be completely different.
Exactly.
But not the other way around, right?
So you said earlier your biggest success with ISU Corp was because of your undiagnosed ADHD, because you're just able to go no matter what.
Yeah.
But because of that, what was the biggest success with ISU Corp?
Recovering from that crash, right? So I grew from 5 guys to 110 guys in a year and a half.
Oh, wow.
And then I had a heart attack. So that was the maximum test of ADHD. I was kept going and I just indulged on hyperactivity. And then I crashed and by 2012, I was almost bankrupt. So I got down the team again to very few people. And in 2013, I started doing what I was supposed to be doing without knowing that it was ADHD, right? Right. So I learned how to exercise every day. I learned how to do prayer meditation every day. I started reading positive business books. I just surrounded myself with people. I rebuilt the team. I went for attitudes. I went for values. I started believing in our values and creating culture from only 3 values. Hyper focusing on the right things.
Right. And yep. Go ahead.
That's how it brought tremendous success.
So I think you bring up a good point where when you don't know it's hyperactivity, ADHD, I remember this because you just said it kind of sparked my memory was I would go until I would get hurt or physically can't do it. And then once I got clarity, it was my ADHD brain and hyperactivity that's not satisfied, providing that drive. Having that awareness is now going, oh, okay, it's my brain now. What can I do? I got to slow down. So I'm really working on free time, not doing work on the weekends and evenings, but it takes a cognitive effort because I know my hyperactivity will push me. But now we just got to think of it differently and do something differently. But it sounds to me, what I heard from you is now that you're aware of it, we can now channel that energy differently rather than our one hyper focus of building a company.
And you know, Andre, I saw a video from an ADHD specialist and he showed 10 things. He showed 10 things that you can do to manage your ADHD without using medicine or on top of medicine. And I was doing 9 out of those 10 things just unconsciously. Yeah. I tell you one thing, like before the pandemic, I will have so much trouble falling asleep. I will go to bed at 11 p.m. and roll in bed for 2 hours until I ended up going downstairs to watch TV until 3 a.m. That was every day.
Yep.
The pandemic hit and I got a walking desk because I was going crazy without traveling, and I started walking, and that saved my sleep because now I get so tired from walking all day and working that now I go to bed at 11 p.m. and I just fall right asleep.
Yeah.
Because I was able to spend my energy in a positive way by doing slow exercise while I work.
Yeah, and then the other thing too is what they've discovered is the physical hyperactivity, if that's not satisfied, it becomes an internal mental hyperactivity where the brain can't stop. And then for me, what I started doing is I started doing the meditation before bed just to slow my brain down enough so I can sleep and sleep more than a few hours. So no, that's good. There's a lot of stuff that we realize every time I'm talking to an ADHD, high achieving ADHD entrepreneur, we've always done something to overcome our symptoms. We just subconsciously say, hey, this is a problem. This is how we're just going to deal with it and do with it. But not having this awareness has caused us issues and problems. And I'm very happy for you to be, first of all, to take a look at ADHD as a potential. You talk to a couple of people and then coming to terms and say, hey, something's not right here. Let's go get something to help. And in your case, it was potential problems with your wife, your marriage. And I got to commend you for taking that initiative to say what's going on and get clarity. So that's fantastic. Congratulations.
It's very dangerous, Andre. Undiagnosed ADHD to the level that I had it, it almost killed me with the heart attack, and it almost created a divorce.
Yep.
You don't know how much we love each other with my wife. Like, we are destined to be together, and I almost messed it up just because I wasn't diagnosed and I was just living out my ADHD life, you know?
Let's just be clear here. You didn't mess it up. ADHD did.
Yes.
So that I wanted the listeners to make a clear understanding here. It wasn't David that caused the problem here. It was ADHD brain and not understanding that. So it wasn't a moral failure on David's part. I might be speaking out of term, David. I just correct me if I'm wrong, but I just didn't like hearing him say it was my fault. It wasn't his fault. It was the undiagnosed ADHD. It's not the excuse, but there's understanding and clarity now that it's not you the problem. We just got to understand how this brain works and how it's going to work with a neurotypical spouse.
Yeah. But you know what? There's also the responsibility never goes away. My doctor described it this way. You're not your brain. You're not your body. You have full power to control your brain and your body. So you're still fully responsible. If you're a psychopath and you go and kill 3 children, you still go to jail, right?
Yeah.
Even though your brain is messed up. So that's why I said it was I still take that responsibility. But now that we know that I have ADHD, when something happens and there is a misbehavior from my part, my wife stops me right away and she says, don't let your ADHD control you.
But that's
clarity, right?
But that's exactly my point. She understands. I understand. What she's saying now, I understand this is your ADHD brain. So time out. This is not David. You're just being ignorant or you're being difficult. This is, wait a minute. This is an ADHD thing. I'm making you aware. How can we do it? And that's powerful because it's no longer a David issue. It's a brain thing.
Yeah.
And that's what the key thing is. That's why it's an explanation. I agree. The past is the past. We still have to take responsibility for it, even though it's not our fault. But now that we know it, it's an explanation and to move forward. But you're right. Even though you weren't aware of the brain, there's still responsibility. But I didn't like that you said it was all your fault because it wasn't David's fault. It was the brain. Undiagnosed ADHD. So
and it's I highly recommend people that if they think they may have it, go get checked. Go get checked because you're gonna save years of suffering. And also if you have children, get your children checked because they may have it too.
Well, and that's the other thing. If it's not ADHD, at least you can discover what the issue is or the problem, and then you can fix it, right?
Right.
And mental health, to me, I'm starting to say mental health has to be your number one priority over your physical health because your brain controls so much of your body that if you don't have a healthy brain, it's going to be very hard to have a pure, healthy body. So I commend you tremendously, David, on that journey because that took a lot of courage to say, hey, I want to save my marriage. I want to get clarity and understanding. And I think this is the big thing the listener should take away is that in David's case, the diagnosis provided a lot of clarity and grounding. I heard a lot of grounding from the diagnosis and he's nodding yes. And with that, he's gaining more success in his marriage and his company, which makes him a lot happier. And that awareness, like I say, awareness is knowledge, is action with knowledge. So the awareness, just because you're aware and you don't do anything, just means you have knowledge. You have to take action on the knowledge, and that's true awareness. So thank you, brother. I love, this is a great conversation. And I think a lot of listeners are going to probably, no, I know quite a few are going to relate to it. A lot of them are going to say, hey, maybe I got to have a different type of conversation with my spouse now.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, and like I said, it's like a shiny light coming from heaven, dude, because when you realize, when we're finally sunk in with my wife, it was like, oh, now I know why this and why that, and we can go past the years and realize all the mistakes I've done because of the condition. I want to leave you with this thing, Andre, that is been helping me the most, and for your audience. My doctor told me to do 3 things daily, every day, to cope with this condition. Number 1, prayer meditation, right? So meditate every day. Number 2, daily exercise.
yes.
For me, I do this slow walking. If I'm walking, and now I do it with moderation, because I used to do 20K a day. Now I'm just doing 10K a day.
Yep.
Because otherwise I'm gonna mess up my body too.
Mm-hmm.
So exercise, and then the last thing, which is changing my life, I have to count 150 times a day, telling myself silently, life is good, God loves me. When I asked my doctor, why do I have to tell myself 150 times, life is good, God loves me? He told me that positive affirmation in my brain, it releases just a tiny little bit of dopamine.
Yep.
So that if you do it consistently throughout the day in your brain, you're self-regulating your dopamine level, and it's going to be a blissful life. And I've been doing it. Like yesterday, for example, when it gets gray and starts snowing, here I tend to get depressed. So I'm like, no.
For me, I get excited.
You know, I did it for 10 minutes and I was fine the rest of the day, you know?
Yeah, and those are 3 perfect things. Prayer, meditation, just basically to slow the brain down. To slow down is the big thing too. Your daily exercise, which they say is minimum 20 minutes. 20 minutes is all you really need. And then, like you said, when you said life is good, God loves you, that's the positive self-talk and affirmation, which is a skill that we do not have. A lot has to do with our backgrounds. And then you're right, it does a mini dopamine hit. So I think those are 3 great points for the listeners to take from. And I think there's a great point to add here. And David, thank you very much for sharing your story. I'm really happy you came on.
Oh, my pleasure. And you know, it's crazy because we've been meaning to do this interview, and it came at the right time, because if I would have done this a month and a half ago, I couldn't have told you all these things.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
All right. Thanks for listening. And to you, the listeners, again, thank you very much. And I want to hear from you is, how is your ADHD affecting your marriage or relationship? You can send me an email at andre@andreb.ca. I'd like to hear it from you. Take care. Thanks, David.
Thanks for having me, brother.